There's a secret map hidden right in the pages of the US Constitution that tells you exactly what you need to know about how our government is put together. Sure, it's no secret map to a hidden treasure, but it's pretty exciting nonetheless. I'm Brian, and I will show it to you. I teach videos about law, civics, history. These are not the most popular videos online, so please comment, share, repost, get this out there so people see it. Because this is important information, you deserve to understand how your law and government work. All right, let's get started. First, let's take a look at the US Constitution. We have 7 articles and then a bunch of amendments. And it's not that the rest of the amendments aren't important, but we're going to stop today with number 10, right at the end of the Bill of Rights. Now, before we go any further, we got to talk about where America was when these things were written. Because America had just gotten out of 2 pretty bad relationships when they came up with the US Constitution. First, you had the relationship with King George, the people who were supposed to be representing us in the House of Commons, and George's judgy friends in the House of Lords. So we got these 13 colonies, now 13 states, who were supposed to be represented by the House of Commons, but they didn't elect any of them, so they weren't really representing them. And then King George gets his authority from God, narcissist, so they broke up with George, but then they started dating Art. Art, to his friends, or Articles of Confederation, was sort of the opposite of King George. Where King George was all authority, Art had no authority. Art was nothing but a legislature with no executive and not really a judiciary to speak of. So as these states started to fight with each other, there was nobody there to settle the disputes. If you went from one state to another, your rights changed completely. Trade wars broke out between them, and nobody could settle them. It was a disaster. It went really badly. So the Constitution came along to find a Goldilocks happy medium between those 2 options. Okay, so here we are writing the Constitution, trying to find our Goldilocks. Now let's start drawing our map. So the first thing we know is we have our articles and our amendments. So we're going to draw a wall between those 2. We got our wall. Okay, so think of the Constitution as divided by a wall between the articles and the amendments. Everything above the wall is something the federal government can do. Everything below the wall is something the government can't do. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, if you open up the Constitution and start to look, you're going to see a bunch of what are called enumerated powers. Enumerated means numbered, which means on a list. These are listed powers, listed out. There's a list of powers. Anything that is on the list of enumerated powers, the federal government can do. Anything that is not on the list of enumerated powers, the federal government can't. So who can do them? Right here. Anything that is not on the federal government's can-do list is reserved for the state's can-do list. So let me give you an example. Back in the days when the US was dating Art, we had a problem because states were having little conflicts with each other. The general idea, not the rule, but the general idea, is that anything that happens totally inside of the state is kind of left to the state. Anything that crosses over a state border into another state is left up to the federal government. That way the same laws applied no matter which state you're crossing over into. Note that I said generally before you come at me in the comments. If you want to see the actual list of enumerated powers, Article 1, Section 8. But generally when I look at the powers that go to the federal government instead of the state government, most of them seem to me anyway to be either international or things that cross state lines. But again, that's not the rule, it's just something that I've noticed. So as an example, I'll use crime. Most criminal statutes are written just for inside of a particular state. But the federal government also writes criminal statutes. What are those for? Well, if you commit a crime while crossing a state line, that's when federal criminal statutes apply. Otherwise, if you committed the crime in both of these states, how would we know whether to apply this state's criminal law or that state's criminal law? This settles that controversy. So generally, things that cross state lines are above the wall and left to the federal government. Things that stay within the state lines are below the wall and left to the state governments. This wall has a name, and that name is federalism. Federalism is the dividing wall between the federal government and state governments, and it's built into the Constitution and part really of the dividing line between the Articles and the Amendments. But it's not the only line between the Articles and the Amendments. We'll get there in a second. First, I'm going to talk about the other major division that comes from our breakup with George and our second breakup with Art. Articles 1, 2, and 3 of the US Constitution each define a different branch of the US government. After dealing with the Articles of Confederation, we decided that having an entire government that was just a legislature was not going to work. But we already knew that we didn't want one that was totally reliant on a really strong executive, especially one that was chosen by God. So instead, we did something different. Each of these 3 articles sets up a different branch of government, which are also separated by a big wall, although it's a little bit harder to draw. After learning our lesson from King George and Art, we decided to have an executive, a judiciary, and a legislature that were each equal, and separated by sort of a wall themselves. We created a three-part government where each part of the government is separated by its own wall. Our own legislature, executive, and judiciary each need one of the other branches to come on board in order to get anything done. The legislature can pass laws, but the president needs to sign them. The Supreme Court can issue a decision, but the legislature can overpower it with a constitutional amendment. The president can appoint someone, but the legislature has to approve it. Each check has a balance, and that's how our system was designed. So we have our federalism wall here, and our three separation of power walls here. But the Constitution has one more secret hidden in it, because these weren't just 13 colonies or 13 states. Inside each of these states is a bunch of people. And one of the most important lessons we learned from the American Revolution was it wasn't just the governments that needed protecting. It was also the individual people. So there's one more big important thing hiding in the Constitution, and it's right here in cannot do. Below this wall are the amendments, and these amendments each list things that the federal government cannot do to individuals within the states, not just the states themselves. This was a bit more ahead of its time. Now, when this was written, it only applied to the federal government. Later on, some of these rights would be extended so that the states couldn't do these things to individuals either. But this would take time. The point is that as we were creating the federal government and recognizing the need for it, we were recognizing the strengths and weaknesses of the federal government and the state governments to enforce and to protect the rights of people. And you can see that in the actual layout and structure of the Constitution. So one more time, there are three major concepts built into the structure of the Constitution. First, separation of powers built into the Articles. Second, federalism distributing power between the federal and state governments. And third, the amendments protecting the individual rights of people within the states from their government. Okay, that was a lot. If you can remember that there's a divide between the Articles and the amendments, that Articles 1, 2, and 3 are the three branches of government, and that the amendments protect individuals, that's a good way to walk away from this video. I am running today on the coffee that was sent by Stephanie Ray, so thank you. Anybody else who wants to support me, my Amazon wishlist and Venmo and other stuff are all in my link tree. Thank you guys so much. Hopefully this was helpful. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have questions. Let me know in the comments if you see any of the current events going on right now fitting into this discussion. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know if you have any questions, and keep coming around and I'll keep making these. Thanks a lot, guys. Ugh.